I am unashamed. What about you?
Well, welcome to another Unashamed. We've got this started off with a positive because I really was wondering if Zach was still alive. And then he just popped up. But he was about 15 minutes late. And he wasn't prepared. He didn't have his earphones. He didn't have his mic. But all that didn't matter because I thought, you're alive.
He's alive.
You're here.
So what? So he gets hidden every once in a while for a week or two, but then all of a sudden he's back.
No phone.
What exactly
no way
is
to
his
reach
job? What's his? What do you call it? What's his?
I have no idea.
He's an international man of mystery.
That is the question. I get asked that a lot. Well, for me, this is like my therapy. I do have a job that I have to go to work.
I mean, one day flying along and enjoying each other's company, we had spoken somewhere. All I said was,
"Is that better?"
To Zach and Al, we need to get on that blooming internet. I said, because they can reach people, and that's all I said. Well, the next thing I know, they all took off like the shirt tails on fire. And I mean, they pulled it off. We're on the internet. Well, here we sit, Jace. Now what we're going to do, because our man, they come and they gone. They come a little bit and they gone. You see Zach, then you don't see him for a month.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what all is involved in that. He's on man on the move.
He just appears. That's what's so fascinating about the worldwide. Well, this is not the World Wide Web. What is it? This is just intercontinental connections. People just show up on
the World Wide Web. We're on RSS feeds, all the alike. But you guys make me sound kind of shady. I'm not up to anything nefarious. I promise you.
He's working.
Business.
He's working on future things. Zach is a man who looks ahead.
He's running in a circle that I've never, after 76 years, I've never entered the circle Zach is actually traveling in. It's men on the move, and they're back behind the shadows. And
well, I'll tell you this, Zach. If you were into shady, I'll give you the topics that we're going to address. Hebrews 13 via the Holy Spirit, entertaining strangers, possible angel encounters, prisons, marriage beds, money, and leadership. So if there's anything shady going on, it's coming out right here, right now, today.
Stay tuned, y'all.
Because I think
that's
there's
what you call clickbait right there.
I'm going to tell you some irony in which I find, I kind of chuckled, is where else in the world or in a book can you go from strangers to angels to prisons to the marriage bed in about 4 sentences?
And a list that's about that long on the kind of men you need to say, we want you to be an elder in the church, the kingdom of God that's going to reach.
Well, that's in Titus.
All over the world.
Yeah.
That's
I'm saying in Hebrews, he brings up leaders, but there are qualifications.
Yeah.
You were telling a funny story about that. A guy that they didn't have pastors or elders in their church. Phil read that list in Titus 1, and they're like, I don't know anybody like that here.
Yeah.
We don't
that's
have
why
those.
We don't have any leaders.
That's why we don't have any. So I'm not sure what needs to be done, but I'm pretty sure a meeting needs to happen.
Well, the problem is with that is it's like everything else we talk about on the podcast. When you try to, make it a quantitative thing where it's just like a list or a law, those are qualities of a person's character. And so that's what you're talking about. Of course, nobody's perfect. There's only one perfect. But a lot of churches get stymied like that because they don't have any leadership because they're saying, well, there's nobody that's, checks off every one of those things in perfection. You're never going to have that.
Do you know why there's less people married today? I think I don't know the exact stats. I could look them up, but I remember at one stage, 75% was married. And then I remember it being like 50 something, and now it's below 50%.
Oh, I know.
But the reason that is because I think people are looking for the perfect match. Especially these internet type thing, find the perfect soulmate. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
That ain't gonna happen because no one's perfect. So no wonder they're just like, nah.
Oh, you're exactly right. Because it's marriage is hard. It's work. I mean, you talk about it a lot with you and Missy. I mean, y'all had not much in common except for your faith, but obviously it's worked out well. I mean,
What's
but you have to work
interesting
it.
is the list. It mentions in lieu of you read where we are in the book of Hebrews, but elders in the church who's overseers. They're looking over the people of God, His kingdom. But blameless is mentioned twice in Titus 1, where a list is given. By the way, when you get these men, the Apostle Paul was talking to Titus, he said they need to be blameless. But, 3 or 4 statements later, he said, they need to be blameless. So how do you run up on blameless individuals in a sin-cursed world, Al? You're an elder.
Well, I am, as are you. No, I think you're talking about reputation. The way the Hebrew writer puts it in verse 7, he says, remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life.
I noticed that.
And imitate their faith. So, that's a kind of so when you talk about blameless, you're talking about a guy that has a good reputation. I mean, people, they know he's not shady. We were joking about that earlier, but they have the reputation that they love the Lord and their way of life. All you got to do is observe them, and you'll know.
But
you'll
even
know what kind of
in
people
marriage and leadership, if we're all flawed, which we are in both cases, well, how you respond to that is ultimately how you're viewed as blameless. I mean, people make mistakes. There's ways of handling that, and so, I mean, if you just try to hide it, if that's your first, or lie about it, and then try to hide it in marriage or in leadership, that's going to lead to not being viewed as blameless.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, it's kind of
an
irony there, if you.
Well, yeah, marriage is a great test of, in the way a man runs his family, as what kind of leader is he going to be in the church? I mean, because it's tough when you're in a family and you're trying to raise kids. I've got 5, and we just got Layla out of the house at 18, and I think that was succceessful. But you
I
always
like the
crossing
way
your
you
fingers.
put that. We just got her out of the house.
Well, she's
Can
not.
she-
But she's
can
not
she
off
come
the
back,
payroll.
Zach? Can she come back?
She can. Yeah, I let her come back during Christmas and break, and but it's like. You get them. You want to raise them up to be godly people, and I think that's when you look at this qualifications for elder. I think it's
Well,
interesting.
you kind of like that old guy on Tombstone. Well, bye.
Look, my father-in-law, this is one thing, I've shared this before. We had the little mishap on the blessing. Missy's like, you got to ask my dad's blessing for the marriage, which turned out to be a terrible idea.
Was it a little awkward?
No, it wasn't awkward.
It was a lot awkward.
He said, no. I'm not giving you the blessing. Well, we didn't have a plan B.
Justice of peace.
Oh, that's not good.
Of peace. Justice of peace. He's the guy. Who marries us around here? We took off to Oklahoma because you don't have to be but 18 to marry. So we go up there, me and your mother, and all he said was, "You want her?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Sign right here. Give me $15." I mean, this was short and quick.
The statement was,
yeah.
Do you want her? The actual
Did he ask her if she wanted you?
Yeah.
It's kind of a two-way street.
Well,
right?
yeah, I think it was some sad times
One of
back
the shorter wedding ceremonies I've ever witnessed.
then. When was this? Back in the 30s or 40s?
No, this is way back.
50s?
This was in the
college age,
60s, Jase.
Oh, in the 60s. Yeah,
68.
I was just kidding. But the 1960s were turbulent times.
You tell me about it.
So what I was going to
I
say
tell you
was
this: I didn't have the qualification for elders at that point in my life. Whew.
but what I was going to say is then fast forward a couple months, because we never really got that resolved with the blessing. But then he did say, because I think he thought, well, this is inevitable. They're going to be married without the blessing or with it, which was true. And so then he tells Missy, I hope he doesn't get mad about this. I think the statute of limitations have run out, but I remember him saying something along the lines, now, if you marry her, she can't come back here. And I just paused and thought, what did he just say? If I marry her, she can't come back here. So I thought, okay. but it was an entry that made me think that when Zach said that about, okay, you're on your own now. You can't come back. But you don't say that because they do come back. But in the marriage, I think he was saying, if y'all have some problems, work it out. His underlying tone was, don't send her back here if you're marrying her.
This is it.
Well, they told me, I just heard a little scuttlebutt through the last, 20 years. It gets worse as we go. But they basically said a lot of young people now who are living with their parents, when they turn 18, they don't leave. They go back in the bed.
Oh, I've had those conversations.
Yeah.
With young men.
It's called failure to launch. Failure to launch.
Yeah. They've been in their 20s, and nobody else would man up and do this. And I said, I'll do it. Because we were having a discussion about a guy the last one I did was a guy in his late 20s that was living in the basement of his parents' house. And if you're in that position now, look, we love you, but it's time to move out. This is the way this works.
Time to go. And
so he was like, well, what biblical evidence? He tried to argue from
biblically. He didn't have to go.
And I started to go down that road, and I just said, look, if you're going to try to argue this, there's a deeper problem. You need to be a leader. It's time to move. I'm not going to have that argument with you. I'm just telling you, as a man who loves you and wants you to, have some direction, be a leader, it's time to move out.
Yep.
Did he move? Did he move? Did it happen?
Nope.
I was hoping for like a great ending. And
and
now he's married with 4 kids.
I'm not laughing because I'm happy, but I don't know what else I can do.
Yeah. Well,
no, it didn't have a happy ending.
But that's the thing about it. And Dad, you were talking about that. That's why elder means older. There has to be some track record.
Overseer.
Yeah.
Just sort of.
That's not, and young people are immature. It takes them a while to be seasoned and to learn things and to be discipled. And so that's why the Bible talks about the text you referred to in Titus. Elder means older. I mean, that's who you need to look to.
Plus
people who have lived some life.
He said he must not be a recent convert. In other words,
well, look, I want to clarify this. I'm not an elder. I'm not a pastor because you have to use more, what is the word? More, diplomacy, and you're in these situations. And so, but I'm just a guy. I'm a believer. And so I think, to me, I didn't really care about the ramifications. I was just blunt about it, and that's why I didn't want to have an argument about it. And I was not very diplomatic, and maybe I should have been. But I will say this. I thought about Phil, because before we jump ahead, this is kind of a funny thing that happened to me. When I was researching...
Hang on, Jay. Let's take a break. One of the things that's hardest on me when I'm on the road, because I'm about to have to hit the road to do some appearances and speeches and stuff, is not having my mattress. Jace, you and I both have experienced what they call helix sleep, and it's really, really good. I wish I could take it with me everywhere that I went.
Get you an RV and put it in there.
Well, I could do that. It probably take me a while to get to places. But we want you to check it out. They have a 100-night risk-free trial. And you go online on their website, and you're going to take a little quiz, and it's only like 3 or 4 questions. And this is just to make sure that they, send the right mattress to what you enjoy, whether you like a little softer, a little more firm. They come with a 10 or 15-year warranty, depending on the model. And like I said, it's risk-free because you get 100 nights, but you're going to love it. And we want you to check it out for a really good night's sleep. Helix is also offering up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our Unashamed listeners. So you go to helixsleep.com/unashamed. That's Helix, Helix, sleep.com/unashamed. You're going to take that little quiz and you're going to get that mattress and you're going to get a good night's sleep. With Helix, better sleep starts now.
When I was researching to back up to where we are in verse 2, verse 1 of chapter 13, when it said, be careful when you, or it doesn't say be careful, but what does it say? Don't forget to entertain strangers. Yeah, for by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. So I was trying to do some research and listen to people who talked about that just to see if I could find anything interesting, which I didn't. But I tried. But there was one guy I heard speaking, and now he really had it made me think of Phil, because he's a pastor at a church, and they live in somewhere in California, but it's a high homeless area, and there's a lot of people on the street. And of course, the next verse, talks about remember those in prison, and he's like, it's kind of ironic when you think about entertaining strangers, and then it brings up prison, because there's a danger to entertaining strangers. And we talked about that on the last podcast.
Yep.
But his point was, and I thought I'd share this. So the guy says, well, here's what I do. He said, I'll give these strangers $1, $2, $5 sometimes. And, oh, well, let me turn my ringer off. I have my ringer on. Gee whiz. It's just bedlam.
Our
You
podcast
wonder
is
why
real
I don't
here.
carry a cell phone.
So he was saying, look, because in their lay of the land, this is most people don't, when they think of strangers, he was saying, we're thinking about all these people you're passing by every day, and you feel guilty for not helping. He's like, I help them. He said, but we also, he said, I don't want to be contributing to the destruction of their lives. I don't want to give them $5 and then they go do something horrific with it, or get drunk, or use that as a money pool to.
Fair point.
Yeah, it's a fair point. So here's why I thought of you, Phil, because here's a guy who's a pastor at this church. He said, so here's what I do. He said, I've never shared this before, and I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm going to share it with you. So he said, what I do is when they say, you got $1 or $2, he's like, yeah. He said, but I want to pray for you first. So you're first thinking, oh, well, because he said, they all say, okay. He said, but then I clarify. And he said, I'm going to pray bluntly. I'm going to pray with passion about your situation. Are you fine with that? And they're like, okay. He said, so then I start the prayer, and it goes something like this. It goes, I pray, Lord, that this individual will use this money for something good, and for something good only. And he said, I usually list a few things that may be good, or needed. He said, however, Lord, I pray that if he does not use this for something good, if he uses this to get drunk, or uses it on drugs, or if he said, I name the obvious sins. I pray that you will bring a curse on him where he will never be able to have another dollar to be used. And he said, in Jesus' name, amen. Of course, the crowd laughed. And I thought about you in that moment, Phil, because I thought, here's a man wrestling with wanting to entertain strangers and be hospitable, but he's also wanting to say, no, wait a minute. Here, I don't want to contribute to that, so I'm doing that in the form of a prayer. So I thought you would think that was funny.
Yeah, I've been there many, many, many times.
But he was serious. I mean, he seriously does that. And then here's what he said. He says, so after the prayer, I say, amen. I say, do you still want the money? He said, there's been some that say, nope. And he thought, okay. He said, but most say, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the question is, do they really believe they'll be cursed? Some of them say, I know what I'm going to do, and I don't want to take a curse.
I did think
That's
it was
pretty funny.
interesting. It does show you that even people that you think are not that intelligent or maybe are mentally ill, they have a conscience that some of them in that moment say, I'm not going to commit to that. Okay. I mean, they had a moment of honesty, which I thought was interesting, which showed you they were going to use it for destructive measures and not for basic needs of humanity. I just thought I'd get your comments.
Many times it's the little money changes hands, but nothing changes. Every once in a while, it works out for their good, but it's really up to them to make the choice to live by faith or not live by faith. Throughout the book of Hebrews, unless you combine what you say with faith, and it's demonstrated in the way you roll, unless that comes along, and you can't make somebody do this, Jase.
Right.
It has to be from the heart, their heart.
Well, he does leap from strangers to people in prison. Now, look, I've always believed, y'all are the experts, not me, but I've always believed this was believers that were in prison.
Yeah, like persecution.
That's what I thought, but there's a lot of the religious world they just believe that there's a lot of prison ministries based on this verse.
Yep.
And look, I'm all for, you have a captive audience. I get it. So, I did a prison ministry.
All of us have spoken in several prisons, so we understand that sometimes people, when their lives have got them to that point, or maybe at a breaking point where they're like, this hadn't turned out well. And so they may be open. And a lot of people do get converted there in those settings. So,
look,
I think it could work either way.
I think he is talking about, I do think he's talking about people in the church that are in prison, because he says here, he clarifies at the bottom there, he says, remember the prisoners as though in prison with them, and those who are ill-treated, since you yourselves are also in the body. So I do think he's talking about people that are in the body that are in prison, and it's about us identifying with their suffering, because if they're in there, he's kind of saying, well, you're in there with them. We're all in this together.
No, I 100% agree. I was just trying to be diplomatic, because a lot of people, they
maybe
do these prison ministries and they use this.
Yeah, you're.
I was trying to be funny, and I guess I shouldn't have been, because it just was a gong show moment. But I was just saying that to say that a lot of people, they just read something and they don't really look at the context. And since we don't, in the U.S., don't have a lot of people, if any, in prison because they follow Jesus, we just think, well, that's not happening. But there are a lot of people across the world who are in prison because they follow Jesus. And look, you're then putting yourself in danger if you were reaching out to them in this setting. So I think it was a pretty powerful admonition.
Yeah, if you don't work, you don't eat. And, work hard with your hands, doing something that's good. But this is kind of interesting. Keep your lives free from the love of money. You have to have it when you work. You get paid for your work. You have a job, and you're doing what's right. But you can't love the money. Be content with what you have, because he says, never I'll leave you, never will I forsake you. Well, there's a lot riding on a person who loves money, but knows he has to have a certain amount of money to survive in any culture.
Well, I think we're going to get to that.
There's a balance in there.
But I think the love of money actually causes a lot of people to be in prison, not for their faith, which is.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you just think about it. We're going to get into the problems here. Because then
even keeping the marriage, when you defile the marriage bed, as Phil, he talks about that too. That also can land you in a courtroom.
Yep.
Not in prison, but it can land you in a courtroom for sure.
Yep.
Well, Zach, what was you going to say about the prison, being in prison? You were going to say something.
Oh, I was just talking about just the identification with the body. I think that I love this whole context of the heading on mine says concluding moral directions. And so to me, it's a kind of an application right here of everything that he's been talking about. This is what it would look like if you were to live out the kingdom in the way that the Hebrew writer is kind of unfolding it. And you start to see this picture of entertaining strangers and like hospitality, purity in your marriage and in your sexuality, and just the whole thing, and the living life, doing life together. And when Phil was talking at the very beginning of this, he had made the equation to elders and how churches are set up. I think it's important because I think there's a lot of this is about doing life together, and God set things up in a certain way so that we could have this accountability, and we could be entertaining people and be hospitable and be sharing life together in the kingdom. And some of us in this culture, they were being persecuted, and I would imagine that they drew a lot of support from the church as they were being tormented by the opposition. And I think that's kind of this thing that he's laying out here.
Hang on, Jace. Let's take a break. We've been talking quite a bit in our Hebrew study about, living in a fallen world. And, obviously Satan is still roaming around and doing a lot of evil things and enticing people. And that you probably see that the most on the internet, and pornography in particular. This has been a plague, on our country and our culture for a long time, but it seems to get worse now, and people are exposed to it younger and younger. But we have one of our sponsors is a great group called Covenant Eyes. And so the past 22 years, they have helped over 1.5 million people live a porn-free life. So it can be done. I know some of you out there are really struggling with it because, you sent me emails about it. You need to check these guys out because they've been helping people for a long time. And I know it's a shameful thing to talk about, but they're going to help you. So right now, you can try Covenant Eyes free for 30 days. So there's a free 30-day trial if you sign up today using the promo code Phil. So you got nothing to lose and a lot to gain. You go to Cov, C-O-V-Eyes, E-Y-E-S, coveyes.com/Phil. So that's coveyes.com/Phil. Get that 30-day trial. Get your life in a better place.
Well,
I think one of the themes is empathy, when this thing about the having an understanding for other people who are suffering. And I've always thought that Jesus's greatest quality, one of his greatest qualities, was his empathy, because he never sinned, so he didn't understand us in the way that we all kind of understand. We all say, well, we're all sinners, but he didn't. And yet still, he had so much compassion. How many times does it say he looked at this person and had compassion on them? I mean, that empathy that Jesus displayed, I think, is really a quality that all of us should strive for, that you can see other people in tough situations and you feel for them. You want to walk alongside them.
Yeah, when you get to the end of Hebrews 13 and he starts talking about like leadership, and he uses phrases that we're not comfortable with, like obey your leaders and submit to them. I run into situations where people have these models. I just don't think it's biblical to have a model where you have like a guy who gets vision from God and then he gives it to all the people. I think when we look in Scripture, we talk about elders. There's this phrase about like a lead elder or chief elder or great shepherd in verse 29. The people of God who are brought up from the dead, the great shepherd of the sheep through the blood of the eternal covenant, even Jesus Christ our Lord, equip you in every good thing to do his will. There's also a passage in 1 Peter chapter 5 when it talks about elders. But when you talk about like chief elder or lead shepherd, or like anytime there's a terminology that talks about like one elder being over all the other elders, it's always talking about Jesus. And I think that that's important because in a church, you got to have accountability, and you have to have a group of men that are holding each other accountable. That's what a body of elders is a group of men that are meeting together collectively. There's a collective authority. It's not individual authority of one elder. It's actually the collective authority. It's really more about accountability, that these folks are holding the church and each other too to a standard. where there can be church
It does
discipline
say,
and
Peter
shepherding.
said, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. Then when the chief shepherd appears, Jesus, you'll receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. In other words, there is something to be said about not lording it over elders, not lording it over the flock.
That's the context here. I mean, he spent
is.
10 chapters talking about Jesus is better. We got a better system, and then he goes through the faith of those who believed in the unseen God and trusted. And then chapter 12 he really narrows it down to so you fix your eyes on Jesus. And you throw off these weights that maybe even they are the blessings of God, but that your attitude is not correctly handled. And you be careful of the sin that so easily entangles. And then he just gives this picture of what we're participating in with the kingdom of God that we talked about last time. The all of the unseen realities, which is so awesome. And we talked about having our hope in that. But then he gets here and it's like, okay, so this is how you respond to that. I mean, fixing your eyes on Jesus, which he is our chief shepherd, it reflects the love that, God has for us. And so all of a sudden you start having a love for the brotherhood, having a love for strangers, having a love and an empathy, like Al said, for those in prison.
Having a system of law, these people, the temple worshipers and the priests, the chief priests and the teachers of the law was where all the trouble was coming from when Jesus appeared. I mean, it had become, the leadership had become, lording it over people is an understatement.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to. Because then he gets into marriage, which is, you just think about it. I mean, a focus on Jesus and an acceptance that there are going to be hard times and discipline moments, from God, and you're seeing each other. You're not having this fantasy of finding the perfect match. You're having to work despite the flaws, which is a way more secure, intimate relationship than this idea where it's like to make who is that speaker who was saying, having a marriage is not a consumer driven arrangement, which is, you go to the grocery store and what? You buy what you want and what you need. Yeah, at the most discounted price you can find. And guess what? If they don't have what you need, or if they're too expensive, well, you just go down to another grocery store. And so I think people enter marriage with that mindset, and they're like, well, wait a minute. I got a better deal over here, and that's why it's so difficult. But in fact, it's based on a promise, that's why I think he brought up marriage here, that this is a covenant relationship that you're entering, which is more sustainable and more free. I mean, there's more freedom based on a covenant than just trying to figure it out based on your emotions or passions.
Because it's not transactional. You mentioned the word intimacy.
But you got to remember the qualifications here. We probably should discuss this more, as a church when we get into Hebrews and what kind of men you should be. An elder must not be a recent convert or he'll become conceited. He may become conceited and fall under the same judgment as the devil, which, he must also, check this out, in verse 7, this is 1 Timothy 3, verse 7, he, the elder, must also have a good reputation of all people with outsiders. He needs to get along with people who are not godly. So that's interesting, so that he will not fall into disgrace into the devil's trap. And then he says this, deacons, here's another group of individuals just beneath the elders. They're to be men worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, so they're not out getting drunk, and not pursuing dishonest gain. They've got the money thing where they don't love money. They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith and with a clear conscience. They first must be tested, and then if there's nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. Then he mentions their wives, women worthy of respect. I'm just making these points to show you, although we're all under grace, there is a tier of leadership. Jesus, the older men of faith, the younger people of faith, elders, deacons, all the way down, and then teachers, of course. But you look at all that, there is some structure to all this.
Yeah, and I think Phil, that underscores the importance. And I really want to say this because I'm really convicted about this, especially with what we do. There's an importance to the local church. I mean, you cannot wash that away. And when Jase was talking about marriage, I mean, you could take that same type of spirit and move that into the church. And I think we do that so much. We're going around and we're shopping for this. Well, they didn't meet my needs, or they didn't do this. Look, I think the way God designed it is imperfect people in a marriage and growing towards Him and closer community with Him through community with each other. And through Him, they find community with each other. It's the same thing in the church. And a lot of our listeners, like there's no substitute for a local church. Like Unashamed is not a church. You know what I mean? Even going online, that's great. Tune in online to whatever church, but that's not being a part of the church. There is no substitute for being in a congregation that has elders and leaders that are shepherding God's people to become more like Christ. There is no substitute for that. And I think in our culture, what's happened in the church is we've turned it into some kind of consumeristic thing that we go and we consume worship as opposed, and if we're not getting our needs met, then we're gone, as opposed to going and actually participating in a body under local leadership.
Yeah, the whole thing gets too laborious. It gets to be a laborious exercise.
Hang on. Let's take a break. So, Dad, we talk about this a lot, but, the millions of Americans are starting to kind of wake up to a country they really don't recognize anymore. There's so many changes in our culture and not a good thing. So while people are out there struggling to raise their families and pay their bills, you got media and corporations telling them that they're what's wrong with the country. But one of our sponsors, Patriot Mobile, they bill themselves as America's only Christian conservative cell phone company. And so we know sort of some of the big ones definitely do not have our values. But Patriot Mobile does. They fight for the sanctity of life, religious freedom, and the Second Amendment. So that's why they're different. Inflation's made it hard on Americans, but Patriot Mobile has plans for any budget, and they offer the same nationwide coverage as all the major carriers. So get that same great service, but know you're going to do it with a company that shares your values. They have special discounts for veterans and first responders as well. Go to patriotmobile.com/Phil, or you can call them at 972-PATRIOT. Use the offer code Phil to get free activation. So that's patriotmobile.com/Phil, or call them 972-PATRIOT.
But the key point is, despite the flaws, and that's, you have a commitment. This is based on a promise. I mean, first he says marriage, then he gets the leaders, but he says here marriage should be honored by all. I mean, because it's a fundamental bedrock piece of society and in the church, because it's based on a promise, and it was God designed. Now, I mean, when you say, well, what is marriage? Why is that a fundamental thing? Well, you look at what God said many times throughout the Bible. He was real specific, talking about, for this reason, a man, it starts off saying God made them male and female. And then it says, I think of Matthew 19, Jesus said that. He quotes what God said. And you say, well, how come he's been so specific? Because in any culture, when you start shopping around or basing it on whatever your feelings or passions or whatever is in, the moment, you can get off by, I just picked that one thing, find your perfect match. Well, that's a lie. That will never be, there is no perfect match, because all people are imperfect. You've built it already on a lie. And so people, when they get married, they're like, well, this is nothing perfect about this. And so he then quotes and says, for this reason, a man, he made them male and female, will leave his father and mother, which is why I told the guy to move out of the basement and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So you kind of have the overall, and it's human anatomy. It always goes back to that as far as matching the parts for what. So the obvious thing is so that you can have a population. Without, I don't think I have to go in the birds and bees, but that's how people get here. A man and a woman get together and people come. So if that didn't happen in one generation, there'd be no people. So, but you say that and people are like, boy, that's deep. That's how we all got here. No, that's a fundamental fact. And so, as believers in God's word and that God is the creator, we're like, this is how people arrive on the planet. And they're like, wow, fascinating. But I don't think it's just that, because then when you think about when he said marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure, so you realize, well, if God is the architect, well, he made this act, the sex act, pleasurable, because it's obviously pleasurable. So, so it's not just that it populates the earth, but it's also pleasurable. But then when you think about the marriage, how it's designed, well, it's based on a promise. It's a vow you make to God, and there's a legal document that you sign. And you say, why? It's like almost like God did with us in making that promise and sealing it with an oath to Abraham, and that his descendants would be as numerous as stars in the sky. We do that because a lot of people, they'll say, well, and y'all have heard this a lot. They're like, well, what's a piece of paper going to matter? Oh, it matters. Because in any other venture, that contract that you sign, even like, I had to sign a contract for doing a TV show. Up until then, everybody's talking and you were like, well, I don't like this and I'm leaving. Well, once I signed a contract, guess what? There was some security there, because now we've made an agreement and it's based on a promise. And look, there's actually freedom there, because you can be yourself at your worst, but you realize, oh, this person, we're going to work through this at my worst, because then it gets into real life situations. And so I just wanted to say all that to say, look, there's a fundamental difference in having a God-based marriage as part of the foundation of our society that's actually really helpful and secure.
Unfortunately, we've lost that to a large degree, and we are now paying the price.
Well, you just see the results. Now, I didn't say anything negative, but you see the results of people, to what we talked about, having the consumer idea of marriage. Well, they just stop getting married, or they just get divorced, because they're like, well, I didn't sign up for this. Because what happens is, as soon as you enter that relationship, it's not long for you realize, oh, this person is not perfect. And they're not just here for me. And
or
so
they realize you're not perfect.
Well, exactly.
That's it. The other side. They realize, you're part of the equation. But we went through marriage ministry several times, like different marriage ministries when we were growing up in the church, and when Jill and I first got married. And a lot of the ministries were, how do we meet each other's needs? And every time that I got to the end of one of those courses, I was madder than I was when we started, because I was like, wait a second, she's not meeting my needs. And then she's like, he's not meeting my needs. And even in the church, we've kind of amplified this idea that somehow the point of marriage is to fulfill each other. And we think about that Jerry Maguire moment when Jerry Maguire walks in, and I think Renee Zellweger's character says, you complete me. And I'm like, that's a lie. Like, no one's going to complete you. Jill she cannot complete me, and I can't complete her. And we didn't find any hope in our own personal marriage until we got to the place to where we realized that we couldn't complete each other. And the point of marriage is not just your personal satisfaction from this person, this finite being. It's actually the point. Marriage is a picture. It's a reflection of the inner life of the triune God. All marriage is meant to do is just show us who God is. And so that, and when we experience marriage in that context, it can be the greatest tool of sanctification that God gave us.
I know one thing, it can cause great harm to children if it's not done the biblical way. can cause great harm. And it's all
yeah.
around us, man. I mean, we see the results of it all the time.
Let's take another break. So, Jace, have you ever tried a tart cherry gummy?
I don't think so, Al.
I haven't.
Well, you need to. It's from the makers of Super Beats Heart Chews, and we've talked about those on the podcast before. And these tart cherry gummies, they help reduce inflammation from exercise, and they support your metabolic health. So they're made with a clinically studied tart cherry extract that's up to 40 times more concentrated than any of the other tart cherry extracts. Just 2 tart cherry gummies are the antioxidant equivalent of 16 ounces of tart cherry juice or 100 cherries. So they're great. They're going to help you. They're going to help that inflammation. They come with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. You get to try them risk-free for 90 days and see how you feel. If you don't love them, send them back. No questions asked. So right now you get up to 35% off tart cherry gummies plus free shipping at mytartcherry.com/Phil. This is their best offer available anywhere. That's mytartcherry.com/Phil for up to 35% off tart cherry gummies. mytartcherry.com/Phil. So there's a reason why, Jace, that, divorce, the percentages with every divorce, the percentages go up that the next marriage won't make it. I mean, it's, you can just look at it and it's simple to understand why. It's because you think you keep thinking it's the wrong person. It's them, but it's you and them and her or him. And that's why it continues to not work, because you don't find any resolution. You just keep thinking, another divorce is going to solve this issue, but you keep taking, all the things that led to divorce in your marriage, you're taking that right into the next relationship. So Zach is right. If you can't get that part right, and that's why having a godly marriage is so important than just trying it on your own without any relationship with God. It's pretty tough.
Well,
It's impossible. I'm reminded of the G.K. Chesterton. He wrote an essay, and the title of the essay, it's one of his most famous essays. It said, "What's Wrong with the World Today?" by G.K. Chesterton, and I can tell you the entire thing. It says me, and that was the essay. Just me. Yeah. And that's the thing with our marriage and everything. We step into a church. Yeah, you've heard it say, "What's wrong with this? Our church is a bunch of hypocrites." Well, when you walked in the door, that church became full of hypocrites. We are hypocrites. We're fallen. We're messed up. That's not the point of these relational relationships that God's ordained.
Yeah, and we talked about that. We had Ryan Lee on the podcast recently, Zach, and he was talking about because we were talking about worship in the context of Hebrews 12, and he was talking about how that he was working in the college ministry with you. And, he said, but I was approaching worship like a gig, because he was coming in and just, leading worship and leaving the kids. He said, then I started getting to know them, having them in my home. They found out where my coffee cups were. And all of a sudden doing life together became something unique. And so I think that kind of hits what you're talking about by both a marriage relationship and a relationship in the church, which is, the Bible calls us the bride of Christ. So this marriage illustration definitely crosses over to the same kind of relationship we have with God.
Well, I think when you look at marriage, these people get the idea that, this is based on, passion or a partnership, and when you look at a godly marriage, you're like, well, this is a friendship based on a vow to God that character change is going to occur. And the reason I'm being specific about that character change, because you realize if you make this all about passion and looks, well, that's never going to last. Or romance, as they, say online, come here and find your romance. And so it's just like with God, you base this on a promise. And, when you surrender to God, which is, I'm using that Ephesians 5, is he was talking about marriage and submitting to one another out of Christ. And he gets down to the end and he's like, you need to have your role in marriage. You need to love each other. Love as Christ loved the church. But I'm talking about Christ and the church. And in both cases, they're based on a promise. And that promise is why you don't get up and leave when things don't go your way or one of the two makes a mistake. That's when you get in there and all of a sudden character changes are made. I mean, because I can honestly say my wife has made me a way better person as this thing has developed. But it came from a godly perspective, and that promise was the security there. I mean, if you don't have the security, well, then you're just blown by
By the way,
every feeling in the world.
To all the listeners out there, just remember, I'm now 76. So you'll know before you get there, there'll come a time when sex is not the driving force behind your existence on planet Earth. You'll understand. Okay, it was good while it lasted, but now.
Or as Si says, that ship has sailed. Make me some popcorn.
There are more important things, as shocking as it sounds, than sex. You'll finally get to the point.
Yeah, but when you're 30,
it takes a few years.
When you're 30 and you try to tell, a young man that it's difficult. That's why I think when you have to define love at some point, because when people say, well, it's all about love, and you're like, well, what is love? And I don't think God did this by accident. He gave one of the most detailed definitions, and it's a paragraph of what love is. And look, in my marriage, because Al pointed this out early on. I mean, my wife and I, on paper, the premarital counselor, he suggested that we go our own separate ways because we weren't married at that point. He literally looked at, when you take the test and the compatibility
Jase, you're in a group that probably worldwide, you're in a group, because I know you're not lying about it, that you waited till you married before you get in your wife's britches, and you said, I'm going the godly way.
Thanks for
you
the
probably,
graphic description.
What percentage is Jase and Al with that decision?
Well, we're never going to know what percentage. It's probably small.
All your brothers and your dad, you're like, no.
It's probably small, but that was, I've said this before, it's a lot easier to be a virgin the longer you're a virgin because you don't know what you're missing. So I will say that. I have way more respect for people, and I have a couple of friends who were living with their girlfriend. They came to Jesus, and then they didn't have sex again until they were married.
Yeah,
I mean, to me, that's a lot more commendable. However, my wife and I, we did do that because of our faith. And there was a lot of, you're not going to do that by accident.
That's right.
So you have to have you just have to have some guidelines. And basically the last guideline we had was 3 months before we were married, we had a phone relationship only. And that was my fault because I couldn't keep my hands off of her. So she's like, just call me and I'll see you at the altar. So, which is what happened. And look, my first thought when
That's quite the story there. You mean
just
phone
being honest,
only?
phone only.
You saw her, the lusts, what you carried.
I just couldn't keep my hands off of her. So, and I was not perfect in that situation, but we didn't come close to having sex till our wedding night. But when I came out the door, when they play the dun 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 dun. Because I came out, because I hadn't seen her in weeks.
Yeah.
And I thought, will she be there? Because somehow or another, I thought, what if she just said no, because I just hadn't seen her?
You kind of fulfill that old guy said, what's my chances with you, a million, 1 out of a million? No, he said 1 out of 1,000. She said more like 1 out of a million. That's kind of you were in a.
I was Dumb and Dumber, so
you're telling me there's a chance. But Jase, so I've made an observation here after putting it all together today. So your stubbornness has turned out to be a good quality for you because the marriage counselor said nope. The future father-in-law said nope.
Yep.
And yet you just plowed on through. You're a stubborn man.
I mean, 30 years I'm knocking because look, it hasn't got any easier in 30 years. The personality conflict, it's a daily battle. But what I was going to say is, what I do more than any other thing is I read 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, over and over, because it keeps me from being a consumer in the relationship.
Love never fails.
You're not giving me what I want. You're not giving me when I want. Yeah, I love is patient. It's kind. It doesn't envy. It's not boastful. It's not proud. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. It doesn't delight in evil. It rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres, and it never fails. And every time I read that, I think I got a long way to go.
Everybody does.
I got a long way to go.
You ain't the only one.
But instead of leaving and going across the street where the grass is meaner, not greener, I say, you know what? I go back in there and I'm like, sorry, babe. Let's get back going again.
Yep.
It's that same spirit too that should translate into how we do church and how we lead in church and how elders should, and how people under eldership should act. I mean, I think that's the spirit, and I think that's the reflection of who God is. We come into everything consuming, and then we see a God who overflows and pours out. And so it's hard for us to understand a God that would condescend and become human, become his creation. I mean, that sounds bizarre to us, but I think what this whole thing is kind of getting at, this is the application of everything that the Hebrew writer's been talking about. This is what it looks like. It looks sacrificial. It looks like love. And so I love that you went to that 1 Corinthians 13. My mom made me memorize that when I was a kid.
That's it.
You know?
Yeah, I have it memorized, but...
Well, I've got my go-to verse, and I love 1 Corinthians 13 as well, but I got another go-to verse, and I'll share that in the overtime. If you want to follow us over, it's blazetv.com/unashamed to subscribe to Blaze and get our overtime session. So we'll see you on the other side.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.